Ethan was just 11 years old when he realized something was wrong. His mother disappeared without a trace, and everyone seemed to accept his father's explanation. She had simply gone away, but he knew that didn't make sense. His father, an influential lawyer, showed no concern and avoided talking about the matter. While family and acquaintances went on with their lives, Ethan felt like he was the only one who saw the pieces of this mystery coming together in a frightening way. He began to observe every detail, looking for answers that no one else wanted to see. This terrifying and dark story shows how a boy faced his own father to seek the truth and secure justice for his mother. What made Ethan suspicious? How did he manage to make the police believe him? And what really happened to your mother? Follow every detail of this story and discover how a boy had the courage to face a chilling secret that no one wanted to see exposed. Ethan Bennett woke up early that morning smelling the familiar smell of coffee that used to invade the house. The sun came through the crack in the curtain, illuminating the football posters plastered on the bedroom wall. He stretched slowly, letting the sleep gradually dissipate, and picked up the clock next to the bed. It was already late for a school day, which was strange, as his mother always woke him up early. With a strange feeling in his chest, he got up and walked down the silent hallway, waiting to hear the usual sounds of the morning routine. But unlike every day, there was no sound of the kettle on the stove or the clink of the cups that her mother used to arrange on the table. The silence seemed too heavy for that house that until then had always been so lively. Looking around, Ethan felt butterflies in his stomach when he noticed that his mother's bag wasn't on the sideboard in the living room where she always left it. The couch was spotless, as if no one had sat there the night before, and her bedroom door was ajar. He hesitated for a moment, before slowly pushing it in. The bed was made with no sign that anyone had slept there. The wardrobe remained closed, but the absence of any note or message further increased the discomfort that was growing inside him. He went back to the kitchen and picked up the landline, dialing his mother's cell phone number. He called until it went to voicemail, tried again, nothing. His breathing became shorter, and his heart began to beat faster. She would never leave without warning. Never. He then decided to call for his father, who was probably still at home. But as he crossed the corridor that led to the office, he suddenly stopped. The door was closed and the room seemed colder than usual. He took a deep breath and knocked lightly, waiting for a response. Hearing a muffled murmur inside, he turned the doorknob and found his father sitting behind the desk, immersed in papers as if nothing unusual was happening. Richard looked up with a disconcerting calm and simply said that his mother had left early. Ethan frowned, without saying anything, without saying goodbye. Something was wrong, and he felt it deep in his chest. This was the first time his house had felt so strange. Richard Bennett has always been a man with impeccable appearance. He used to wear well-tailored suits and maintain a firm posture that commanded respect in any environment. An influential lawyer known for his coolness in court, he rarely showed emotions that could compromise his image. His eloquence and control over words made him a professional who was admired and feared at the same time. Inside the house, however, his presence was more rigid than welcoming. Arguments with his wife had become frequent in recent months, and even when silence reigned, the heavy atmosphere never left any doubt that something was wrong. Ethan always noticed the tension between his parents, but as he was just a child, he didn't know how much it could change his life. The day passed, strangely. Ethan tried to follow the routine, but the discomfort of not knowing where his mother was grew by the hour. At first he thought that maybe she really had left and would soon return, but as time progressed, the emptiness of the house became increasingly disturbing. No phone calls, no messages, no clues as to where she might be. When he finally asked his father, Richard responded with the same calmness he used to use to dismantle opponents' arguments in court. He said his mother had gone out to rest, and there was no need to worry. He spoke as if it were something completely normal, without looking away or showing any hesitation. Ethan frowned, trying to understand that sudden explanation. His mother had never traveled without warning beforehand. The way Richard handled the situation only made everything more strange. He didn't seem surprised or worried. He just wanted the matter to end there. Ethan tried to insist, but his father cut the conversation short with a definitive tone. He said she needed some time and would be back soon. The boy felt a knot in his stomach. Something didn't make sense. His mother would never leave without warning, without leaving at least a note, without kissing him goodbye. He knew her habits and knew something was wrong. The father's silence was unnatural. His indifferent behavior and the rehearsed way he spoke only increased the suspicions that were already growing within him. Even without proof, Ethan felt that this was no ordinary trip. Ethan spent the rest of the day trying to find some explanation that made sense for his mother's disappearance. He took out his cell phone and sent several messages, but they all remained unanswered. He called again and only heard the automatic recording informing him that the phone was turned off or out of range. With each failed attempt, the restlessness grew. His mother would never ignore his calls, especially knowing that he would be worried. He went to her room again and looked around for any clues. Nothing seemed different. The clothes were still there. The shoes were still in place. The hairbrush was still on the dresser. If she had really traveled, why didn't she take anything? Once again, he went to his father's office, determined to get some answers. Richard remained impassive without taking his eyes off the papers spread out on the table. He repeated with the same forced calm that Ethan's mother just wanted some time alone. He said she was tired, overwhelmed, and needed to breathe away from everything. He added that it was best to respect this space and stop insisting. The coldness in his father's voice made Ethan shudder. There was something wrong with that explanation. His mother would never leave him without warning, much less ignore his attempts to contact him. Furthermore, when she was tired, she didn't run away. He would just drink a cup of tea and rest for a few hours. The memory of his last conversations with his mother came back to him. Her marriage to Richard had been in ruins for a long time. The fights became frequent, and he knew his mother couldn't take it anymore. A few days before, she had sat with him in the living room and told him in so many words that she wanted a divorce. She said she was tired of living in a relationship marked by distrust and betrayal. That night, while distractedly fiddling with the ring she still wore on her finger, she assured Ethan that everything would be fine. The decision was made and she wasn't going back. Now she was gone without a trace, and the only person who seemed comfortable with it was her father. Ethan's stomach dropped. A bad feeling started to take over him. Something wasn't right, and no matter how much he tried to push that thought away, he couldn't ignore the fear that was growing inside him. In the days that followed, Richard seemed even more absent than usual. He spent hours locked in his office and avoided any conversation that mentioned his wife's name. If before he used to maintain a controlled and confident posture, now his coldness seemed even more evident. He didn't ask if Ethan needed anything, and he didn't show concern for his own son. When he left for work, he didn't say what time he would return. When he was at home, he was always busy with documents and calls, as if his routine hadn't been disrupted by his wife's absence. Ethan watched everything in silence, increasingly convinced that his father was hiding something. Richard's lack of any emotion bothered him. If his mother had actually left the house for some alone time, why wouldn't he show concern? Why didn't I try to contact her or even talk about it? One night, Ethan stayed up late and heard heavy footsteps in the hallway. He got up slowly and peered through the crack in the door. He saw his father standing in the living room staring at an undefined point. His face was still and his gaze was distant, as if his mind was trapped in some deep thought. For a moment, Ethan almost asked if everything was okay, but something made him pull back. The silence in that house already seemed too charged. Richard's coldness became even more evident whenever Ethan tried to bring up the subject. If he insisted on talking about his mother, he would just sigh and say that it was already resolved. If she asked if she had already received any news, Richard would simply repeat that she needed space. In one of these conversations, Ethan noticed a slight tremor in his father's hands when holding a glass. It was the first time he noticed any sign of nervousness, no matter how small. He was hiding something. Everything inside him said that. Richard's indifference was unnatural. It was as if, instead of missing his wife, he was just waiting for time to pass so the matter could be forgotten. The days passed and no one seemed to question his mother's disappearance. Her maternal grandmother said that maybe she just needed some time away from everything. Family friends commented that she had always been reserved and that it wouldn't be so strange if she had decided to travel without telling anyone. Even her neighbors, who used to talk to her almost every day, seemed resigned to the idea that she simply wanted to disappear for a while. Ethan listened to these conversations without believing what they were saying. Your mother would never do that. She would never stay away for so long without giving him news, and she would never leave him without an explanation. The fact that no one suspected made everything seem even worse. How was it possible that only he felt something was wrong? At school, Ethan also tried to vent to some classmates, but no one seemed to pay much attention. Some said he was exaggerating and that other students' parents also traveled from time to time without warning. Others just shrugged their shoulders and changed the subject. He felt like he was alone in this. No matter how many times he tried to explain, no one seemed to be bothered by the situation as much as he was. Deep down, I knew that people preferred to believe the simpler version. It was easier to accept that her mother had taken time for herself than to imagine that something worse could have happened. But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. With no one else to turn to, he decided to seek help in another way. He waited until he was alone at home and called the city police station. His heart was beating fast as he heard the phone ring. When a police officer responded, he tried to explain everything that was happening. He said that his mother was missing, that he wasn't answering calls, and that his father's behavior was strange. He said that she wanted a divorce, and that she disappeared soon after. On the other end of the line, the police officer's voice remained calm and attentive. He asked some questions and said they would investigate the case. Ethan felt momentary relief, but knew there was still a lot to be discovered. This would be just the first piece of the puzzle. After the call, Ethan felt like he couldn't just wait. As soon as class ended, she left through the back of the school without telling anyone and walked to the police station, keeping her head down to avoid prying eyes. The journey seemed longer than usual, and his heart was pounding with anxiety about what might happen. Upon arrival, he hesitated for a moment before pushing open the glass door. He was attended to by a police officer who, after hearing his name, took him to a back room where a man with a firm posture and attentive eyes was waiting for him. His name was Michael Hayes, the investigator responsible for the case. He gestured for Ethan to sit down, and without rushing, asked him to tell him everything from the beginning. Ethan took a deep breath and began to report everything he knew. He talked about the last time he saw his mother, about the unread messages, about the unanswered calls, and about his father's strange behavior. He said that Richard didn't seem worried at all, and that he insisted that his mother just wanted some time for herself. Michael listened attentively, without interrupting, just writing down some details in a notebook. At one point, he asked if Ethan remembered anything that could indicate possible danger before his disappearance. The boy hesitated for a moment before saying that his mother wanted to get a divorce and that she had already made that decision some time ago. The investigator frowned when he heard that and asked a few more questions about the father's behavior before and after his disappearance. The conversation lasted longer than Ethan expected, and for the first time, he felt like someone was really listening and trying to help him. As the sky began to darken, Michael decided it was best to take Ethan home before Richard suspected anything. On the way, he explained that he needed to act cautiously and that a formal investigation would take time. He said that from that moment on, the two needed to find a way to communicate without arousing suspicion. He stopped the car on the corner far from the house and handed over a card with a phone number. He asked Ethan to send short messages if he discovered something new, and to be careful not to attract his father's attention. The boy got out of the car, crossed the garden, and entered without making a sound. Richard's office was still lit. The sound of the keyboard filled the silence of the house. Ethan walked through the office door, but his father didn't even look up to notice that he had left. This indifference only reinforced what he already felt. Something was very wrong. In the following days, Ethan anxiously awaited any news about his mother's case. Every time his cell phone vibrated, he picked up the device hoping for a message from Michael, but they were almost always just irrelevant notifications. The police had begun an investigation, but without concrete evidence, they could not move forward as he had hoped. Michael made it clear that they needed to act carefully, as Richard was an influential lawyer, and any hasty move could ruin everything. Ethan understood, but he couldn't hide his frustration. His mother was still missing and nothing seemed to change. The people around him continued to live their lives normally, while he felt trapped in a mystery that only he seemed to want to solve. One day during break at school, Ethan went out to breathe a little and took the opportunity to call Michael. The investigator answered on the second ring, as if he had already been waiting for his call. With a firm voice, he said that he was doing everything he could, but that there was still nothing solid enough to confront Richard. He explained that they tried to track Ethan's mother's cell phone, but the device had been turned off since the day of his disappearance. They also said that there had been no recent bank transactions, which indicated that she was not using her cards. Ethan felt a knot in his stomach when he heard that. If your mother had really left the house on her own, as Richard said, why didn't she take her cell phone with her? Why didn't you withdraw money or make any purchases? Each new piece of this puzzle only made everything stranger. When he returned home that afternoon, Ethan noticed that Richard was quieter than usual. He walked straight past him without saying anything and went to the office, locking the door behind him. Ethan stood still for a moment watching that scene and felt a shiver run down his spine. He took out his cell phone and typed a quick message to Michael, letting him know that something was wrong. A few minutes later, he received a short response, telling him to remain calm and remain alert to any unusual behavior from his father. Ethan took a deep breath and tried to act normally, but the restlessness wouldn't leave his head. If the police didn't have evidence to act on, he would need to find something on his own. Anxiety gnawed at Ethan from the inside. The police did their best, but without concrete evidence, the investigation seemed to be at a standstill. He knew he needed to do something, and that if he waited too long, he might never find out what really happened to his mother. It was then that when he saw Richard's car parked in the garage, he had an idea. His father rarely left his computer, immersed in his papers and phone calls, which meant this was the perfect time to investigate. He looked out the window of the house and saw that the office was still closed. He took a deep breath and approached the vehicle, trying not to make any noise when opening the door. The strong smell of leather filled his nostrils as he climbed into the driver's seat and began looking for anything that might be a clue. He started in the trunk, but only found some crumpled papers in a folder with old documents. Then, he bent down to look under the seats, running his hand through the tight space, feeling dust and small debris that accumulated over time. Nothing seemed suspicious. He opened the center console, looked through the side compartments, and even checked the carpet to see if anything had fallen there. My heart accelerated every second, as I knew that Richard could appear at any moment. Finally, he opened the glove compartment and found only car manuals, some loose sheets of paper and a pen without a cap. Frustrated, he sighed and leaned back on the bench. Maybe he was just holding on to empty hopes. When he was about to give up, he decided to open the glove compartment once again. The moment he pulled the lid off, a photo slid out and fell onto the floor of the car. Ethan frowned and took the paper, analyzing the image carefully. It was a house he had never seen before. The building looked old, far from any neighborhood. Time seemed to have damaged the paint, leaving the walls stained and the roof slightly sloping. That didn't make sense. Why would your father have a photo of a place like that hidden in his car? Ethan's heart skipped a beat when he realized that this could be the clue he needed. He put the photo in his pocket, closed everything exactly as he found it, and got out of the car as quickly as possible. If that meant anything, he would find out. Ethan held the photo tightly as he walked back into the house. His heart was beating fast and his mind worked non-stop trying to find meaning in it. He waited until his father left for work and took the opportunity to send a message to Michael asking them to meet. The investigator responded shortly afterwards, and they agreed on a discreet place where they could talk without attracting attention. At the appointed time, Ethan left claiming he was going to a friend's house to study. When he arrived at the meeting point, Michael was already waiting for him leaning against the car, observing the street as if analyzing every detail around him. Ethan took the photo out of his pocket and handed it to him, explaining how he found it and why he believed it could be an important clue. Michael took the photo and analyzed every detail, turning it from side to side as if looking for something hidden. He asked if Ethan had ever seen that house before and the boy denied it. The investigator frowned and said he would check the location of the property, as it could be a key piece in the case. Ethan noticed that Michael was more serious than usual, which meant that for once they had something concrete to go on. The police officer made some notes, kept the photo in a folder, and said he would need time to gather information about the house and find out if it had any connection with Richard. Ethan felt momentary relief, but knew they still didn't have answers, just a new path to be explored. Before leaving, Michael asked Ethan to remain alert to any changes in his father's behavior and reinforced that he should act with caution. The boy nodded and promised he would be careful. When he returned home, he found Richard in the office, but that time he seemed more tense than usual. The door was ajar and for a moment Ethan heard the harsh tone of his voice on the phone. His father spoke quietly, but something in the way he held the pen between his fingers betrayed a certain nervousness. Ethan walked straight past, trying to act naturally, but a doubt tormented him. Had Richard already noticed that the photo was missing? If so, how long would it be before you started to suspect something? Michael knew that that photo could be the key to understanding what had really happened. As soon as Ethan left, the investigator went straight to the police station and began a detailed search. He analyzed the image several times, trying to identify some clue, a street name, a number, any detail that could indicate where that house was. After a few hours, he began to cross-reference information and ask for favors from some contacts he had in other states. As Richard was an influential lawyer, Michael knew that this investigation could not be conducted in an obvious way. He needed to act discreetly to prevent any suspicions from reaching Ethan's father prematurely. The searches were long, but Michael's patience was rewarded. After reviewing property records and talking to some reliable sources, he obtained information that directly linked Richard to that house. The lawyer had recently purchased a property in another state without informing anyone. There were no records of changes, renovations, or any activity in the place, as if the purchase had been made for something that should not attract attention. That set off an immediate alert in Michael's mind. Why would Richard buy a remote house without mentioning it to anyone? He knew he needed to act quickly, as this discovery could be the missing piece to understanding Ethan's mother's disappearance. Before making any decision, Michael called Ethan and asked them to meet as soon as possible. When the boy arrived at the agreed location, the investigator revealed everything he had discovered. Ethan was shocked to hear that his father had acquired a secret house, as it only confirmed his suspicions that Richard was hiding something big. Michael explained that they would need to go to the location to check in person, but that this would require a careful plan. The investigator assured him that he wouldn't take any hasty action without concrete evidence, but now they had a destination, a real place to look for answers. Ethan felt butterflies in his stomach as he realized that they were getting closer to the truth, but at the same time, fear was growing inside him. If Richard really did something terrible, how far would he go to hide it? Michael knew he needed to act intelligently so as not to alert Richard. With the information he had, he obtained a warrant alleging possible irregularities in the property, which allowed the police to investigate the place without raising immediate suspicions about the disappearance of Richard's wife. As soon as the document was signed, he gathered a small team and headed to the address. The trip was long as the house was far from the city, surrounded by trees and poorly maintained dirt roads. When they finally arrived, the place looked even stranger than in the photo. The paint was peeling on the walls, the windows were closed as if no one had been there for a long time, and a cold wind made dry leaves accumulate in the yard. The team got out of the cars, walking cautiously to the main entrance. Michael unlocked the door and took the first step inside. The smell of mold and dust filled the room, indicating that no one had lived there for some time. There was little furniture and seemed to have been placed randomly, as if someone had organized the space without intending to use it. A wooden table full of marks and a sofa against the wall were the only objects in the room. The investigator looked around the room, looking for anything out of the ordinary. On the floor, small marks seemed to indicate that some furniture had recently been moved. He went to the kitchen and found an unplugged refrigerator empty inside. The cupboards were also practically empty, just a few cardboard boxes stacked in the corner. What caught the most attention was the lack of any personal objects. There were no clothes, photos, or anything to suggest that anyone had actually lived there. As they searched the rooms, a detail began to worry Michael. The wooden floor creaked in some places, but in others it seemed firmer than expected. As he bent down to take a closer look, he noticed that part of the floor had a small space between the boards, as if something was hidden below. He called one of the police officers and asked him to help remove the carpet that covered that area. As soon as they pulled it, they found a barely noticeable metal handle. Michael held the piece and pulled hard. A wooden lid lifted, revealing a narrow staircase that led down into a dark cellar. The investigator took the flashlight and took a deep breath before taking the first step. Something told him that the answer to that mystery was down there. Michael went down the stairs slowly, feeling the air getting heavier with each step. The darkness of the basement seemed to swallow the dim light of the flashlight, revealing only vague shapes all around. The smell was thick and unpleasant, a mix of dampness and something he didn't want to identify too soon. The space was cramped, with weather-stained concrete walls and a dirt floor. Some boxes were stacked in a corner covered in dust and cobwebs, as if no one had touched them in a long time. The investigator passed the flashlight around the room and noticed strange marks on the floor, as if something heavy had been dragged there. The chill down his spine intensified when his gaze stopped at a specific spot deep in the basement, where a patch of earth appeared darker and more irregular than the rest. He called the police officers who accompanied him and pointed to the location. One of them grabbed a shovel and started digging while the rest of the team watched in silence. With each movement, the earth loosened more easily, revealing something hidden just beneath the surface. Michael held his breath when one of the officers stopped abruptly and raised a shaking hand. The corner of a fabric began to emerge from the upturned earth, and then came what everyone feared. A woman's arm appeared partially covered by the ground. The silence in the basement was broken only by the sound of everyone there breathing heavily. They continued digging more carefully, until the rest of the body was revealed. Michael didn't need anything else to understand what had happened. Before him was the body of Ethan's mother, in a state that confirmed she had been there for days. The investigator closed his eyes for a brief moment, absorbing the weight of that discovery. He knew that this was the final piece to incriminate Richard, but that didn't ease the pain of knowing that Ethan was right from the beginning. He picked up the phone and made the call that would change everything. The authorities needed to be notified immediately, and Richard would have to answer for his crime. As the team began to cordon off the location, Michael felt a tightness in his chest as he thought about the boy who trusted him to find the truth. How would he break this news to Ethan? How would someone just 12 years old deal with a loss like that? But one thing was certain. From that moment on, Richard would have nowhere else to run. The evidence was analyzed urgently, and within hours, the tests confirmed what Michael already knew. The body found in the basement was that of Ethan's mother. Forensics acted quickly, and while agents examined every detail of the crime scene, another team pulled images from security cameras on nearby roads. Richard's car was identified on the way to the house, crossing the estimated time of disappearance. Furthermore, fiber fragments and footprints at the site matched the shoes he used to wear. Each piece fit precisely, leaving little room for doubt. Given all this evidence, there was no longer any reason to postpone the arrest. At the end of that afternoon, Michael received the order he had been waiting for. Richard Bennett was officially accused of murder and would be taken into custody immediately. The car stopped in front of Richard's house shortly after dark. Ethan, sitting on the sofa in the living room, felt butterflies in his stomach when he saw the red lights reflecting in the windows. The sound of firm knocking on the door echoed throughout the house, and then Michael's firm voice announced that Richard should leave. The man appeared in the hallway, adjusting his shirt sleeves, keeping a rigid expression, as if he couldn't believe what was happening. Two police officers entered and handcuffed him without leaving room for discussion. Ethan stood still, watching the scene without being able to look away. For the first time, he saw his father lose control. Richard didn't try to defend himself, he didn't question. He just stared at his son for a few seconds before being taken away. Ethan held her gaze without blinking. I knew I would never forget that cold, unrepentant expression. With Richard arrested, the trial would become the next step. Even though he knew that justice was being served, Ethan felt the weight of what lay ahead. He would have to testify and tell everything he knew, relive every detail that led him there. Fear tightened his chest, but the certainty that he needed to tell the truth was greater. He owed it to his mother. He needed to ensure that Richard would pay for what he did, and that he would never have the chance to hurt anyone again. After Richard's arrest, Ethan went to live with his maternal grandparents. The house was simple and cozy, filled with old photos and memories of his mother. Despite the affection he received, he knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The nights were long and silent, and no matter how much he tried to follow a normal routine, his mother's absence and the weight of the truth were still present in every corner. Michael's visits were frequent, always bringing updates on the case and ensuring that Ethan was safe. The trial was approaching, and even though he knew that his testimony was essential, he could not avoid being afraid. Facing his own father in court wouldn't be easy, but he had already made his decision. He would tell everything he knew and make sure Richard paid for what he did. On the day of the hearing, Ethan was already 12 years old. He felt his stomach drop as he entered the courtroom, which would be more than normal for a child his age under these circumstances, but he didn't allow himself to be afraid. The atmosphere was cold and impersonal, with suited lawyers adjusting papers and judges maintaining neutral expressions. When he was called to testify, he walked to the witness stand and took a deep breath before starting to speak. He recounted in detail the days he spent without answers, the suspicions that grew within him, and the moment he decided to seek out the police. He told about the photo he found in the car, about Michael's investigation, and about the terrible discovery in the basement of that forgotten house. His voice wavered at times, but he continued. He needed everyone to know how his mother was taken from him, how Richard tried to hide the truth, and how no one believed him until it was too late. Richard's defense tried to disqualify his testimony, insinuating that his accusations were based on emotions and not facts. They tried to claim that a 12-year-old boy couldn't be sure what really happened, but the evidence was irrefutable. The images from the security cameras, the records of the purchase of the house, the evidence found at the scene and his mother's own body buried in the basement dismantled any argument. When the trial came to an end, the verdict was announced. Richard was sentenced to 25 years in prison for premeditated murder. Ethan felt a weight lift off his shoulders, but he knew that pain would never completely disappear. He had lost his mother, he had lost his family, but at least he got justice, and that, at that moment, was all that mattered. The years passed, but Ethan's story was never forgotten. He grew up carrying the scars of everything he experienced, but he turned his pain into strength. Whenever they asked how he managed to face all that, he replied that he simply couldn't remain silent. He knew that if he hadn't insisted, if he hadn't fought to be heard, the truth would never have been discovered. His courage inspired many people, and over time, he began to share his experience to help other victims not feel alone. The boy who was once afraid of not being believed now became a symbol of resistance, proving that, regardless of age, seeking justice is a right that no one can take away. Thank you for following this story of courage until the end. If you believe that the truth should always be sought, don't forget to like the channel to continue receiving impactful stories like this. On the final screen, you will find a video recommended especially for you, with more exciting stories that will certainly capture your attention. We've also added a collection of other inspiring stories for you to enjoy. Just click on the screen and continue this journey of emotions and reflections. See you in the next video, with more stories that may surprise and inspire you.